Hi guys, it's Tony here again. How's it going? Hope you're all having lots of fun and ready to listen to me read another exciting chapter from Kamikaze Kangaroos. I'm going to just give you a little bit of an update on what's going on with my writing and that before I actually get down to doing a bit of reading, just to give everybody time to sign in. So I'm actually snowed under with writing projects at the moment. Luckily, I've discovered a slightly new technique to help with my writing, and I've joined a sprint group. And what happens basically is there's a bunch of people who get together, and we are on Facebook Messenger, and we're writing, and one of us sets a timer, and times 20 minutes or 25 minutes. I think we're doing 25-minute sprints at the moment. We all write like all hell for that time, and we don't go back and edit, and we don't try and second guess ourselves. Just write, just get the words down, and then when the timer pings, we all tell each other how many words you've managed to achieve in that time period, and then we chat for 5 minutes, and then we do it again. And it's brilliant because it's actually getting my writing speed up quite dramatically, and I'm writing loads more each night. Unfortunately, the group is based in America, and so when they meet, it's about midnight here, and they tend to sprint until about 3 a.m. here. So I've actually been doing most of my writing between midnight and 3, and then all the rest of my other marketing tasks and my editing and extra bits of writing and stuff in the daytime leading up to then. So a little bit peculiar schedule I'm on at the moment. So if you see a bit of wild craziness in my eyes, it's, this is not my first 2 a.m. in the last few weeks. Let's just put it that way. But I've got a whole bunch of projects, so I'm sort of flitting between them a little bit at the moment, which is almost certainly the worst way I could possibly try and go about this. But I'm writing. I've got a sequel eventually going to come out for the sci-fi books. I finished the first series of 5 books, so there's going to be a sequel, which hopefully will be the beginning of a new series. But I've got that, and that one's up on pre-order for Amazon, so I've got to write that, but I haven't really started it yet. And then I'm writing a prequel series, weirdly enough, with one of the characters, Kyra, from my sci-fi books. So I'm sort of doing that. I'm sort of getting on quite well with that at the moment because I'm really enjoying that. And then I've got a kind of a self-helpy kind of book, my life lessons, like I'm the right person to give anybody advice. But anyway, I got one of those sort of kind of on the back burner that I have had for a while. I keep just adding to bits and pieces. And I'm still in the planning phase of a travel book about all the adventures that we've had, me and Roo, since the end of the last travel book, which was Asia, which was quite a long time ago. I think it was about 7 years or so.
Oh wow, that is a
long time ago. Anyway, so we've got lots of bits and pieces, but it's hard wrangling that into one piece because it's so bitty. It's like, went on a trip here and then had 6 months or 8 months just living, working, doing some crappy job, and then stitching all those bits together without it being incredibly boring and trying to find a common theme throughout it is sort of difficult. So I'm in the process of doing that, and then I'm also considering writing a how to write a memoir book, or possibly how not to write a memoir. But I've seen a few people have written books about how to write books, and some of them are good and some of them average, but there's only one other person, or possibly 2 other people I know of, that have actually written one specifically about how to write a memoir. So I thought maybe I'd give that a crack, because people are always emailing me and asking for advice on how to do that, and I write incredibly long-winded emails, go into huge amounts of detail, because that's floating around my head all the time. And then happy days, that person goes off and either does or doesn't ever do anything with that advice, and I've got hours and hours and hours of time distilled into writing those bits of advice, and my hard drive's littered with them. So I thought, if I actually turn them into a book, and next time somebody asks me that question, I just go, hey, there's a book conveniently by me, read this. So toying with that idea, because a lot of that is kind of already written. Anyway, enough waffle for me. I will now I'll now get to the main event. So this time I thought I'd read about the Bibbulmun Track, and because I won't be reading the bit that describes it, I'll give you a bit of a brief background on it. So it's a walking trail that the Aboriginal people in this area used to use on their migration, and it's not absolutely as it was, but basically they've sort of kept it for the most part, and it sort of joins various water sources and various sort of semi-sacred sites and bits and pieces, and it wiggles all over the damn show. It's not a straight linear route, which is why it's so incredibly long. And it runs from Calamunda, just north of Perth, to Albany on the south coast. On the south coast, or on the south coast of Perth. So, and it's 976 kilometres. 956, is it?
Yeah.
956 kilometres. So it's a pretty decent walk, and people do it. I think a handful of people complete it in one go every year. There's a few hundred have done it or something.
End to end, yeah, it's probably thousands.
Is there thousands now?
Yeah, I
a few
imagine.
people have done it anyway. But most people who actually do it end to end, they call it end to end, and they do it in chunks, so they don't literally start at one end and walk all the way. They do a few days here, a few days there, and it takes months or even years just doing weekend hikes or a week there. And not many people attempt to do it like we did just off the bat.
Because it takes 2 months.
Yes, but Roo's mum had always wanted to do it, and so we sort of did it in her memory, which was awesome, but unfortunately it meant that we had no getting out of it. So when you have a sacred charge, you're kind of screwed. So anyway, so I shall start kind of at the beginning, after we've just left our job working for an arsehole, basically. But we were doing some landscape gardening, and that was a fun job. And me and my sister Gill and Roo all started working the landscape gardening, and then the guy who employed us decided he didn't want to have so many women working for him, so Roo had to leave, and then me and Gill slogged on for a long time, but it was not fun. Anyway, so here we go. This is the first chapter I'll read. It's called Be Prepared. Unsurprisingly, no prize for guessing how much of that advice we actually took. Leaving Trevor's employ had a galvanising effect on us. The clock was now ticking. With no more money coming in, we had to get ready and get gone before our next rent check was due. Being deliciously, gloriously unemployed again after weeks of rough, thankless slog was such a liberating experience. It more than compensated for any misgivings we had. Amazingly, I'd come to fantasise about having nothing to do all day but walk. All three of us were unerringly positive about our chances of success, and our gear shopping trips had an air of celebration about them. Going from op shop to op shop, we quickly amassed a wide variety of technical outdoors clothing. I have a theory about this. Because that stuff is so utterly, ridiculously, unnecessarily expensive, most people who buy it do so purely for that reason. And rather than putting the gear to its intended use in jungles, deserts and mountains of this planet, they go shopping in it. Only to realise, shortly after buying it, that it doesn't look nearly as good as a nice pair of jeans and a t-shirt. So it sits in the back of the wardrobe for a year and then goes to the op shop the next time they have a clear out. Honestly, there are more pairs of moisture-wicking, quick-drying, insect-repellent, SPF 30+, breathable membrane, windbreaker, TM, technical trekking trousers sitting in charity shops than there are wrapped around hikers' arses the world over. Wow, these fit great, and I'm pretty sure they're waterproof, Roo said, holding up some grey hiking trousers. They still had the Nike shop tags hanging off them. They're like the plasticky part of tracksuit bottoms, but without the lining. What else can they be for? Sold for $8. We made one trip to a branded outdoor clothing supplier where Gill and Roo bought hiking boots. While they were being fitted, I wandered around the store, boggling at the prices of things as simple as a plastic knife and fork set. Gill came up to me with a trademark mischievous grin. Tony, look! And she held up a tin kettle of the whistling stovetop variety. She pressed a button with her thumb and the lid flapped open and closed like a mouth. Listen! She waggled the button in perfect lip sync to her sotto voice. Oh my darling, do behave yourself. Eh? Don't you get it? Tony, it's a camp kettle. Oh my God. That's it. We're leaving. No, wait. Don't you want to see my impression of a camp stove? Next, it was my turn. I'd been putting off buying boots as the cheapest pair I'd seen so far was $250. And they say never to buy the cheapest of anything, especially when you're going to depend on them for 2 months straight. Amidst reminders that if I didn't buy some soon, I'd be doing the hike in flip-flops, I entered a store that sold workwear to the average Aussie tradesman. This was my last chance to find a pair of reasonably priced boots, and there were plenty to choose from, with or without steel reinforcement. A size bigger? I requested of the shop assistant. I'd read somewhere that wearing 2 pairs of thick socks was the most effective way to prevent blisters, and I was keen to size my boots accordingly. She brought a huge yellow box out to me and answered my questions as I tried on its contents. Of course they're waterproof, she said. They're leather. Well then, that seemed to end the debate. I left that shop $120 poorer, yet celebrating my win. I'd scored a moral victory against the purveyors of ridiculously overpriced hiking gear. So what if it meant I'd be hiking in work boots? With that done, we were 1/3 of our way through our list of essential pre-hike missions. The 2 remaining ones were to pack, which was bound to be easy, so we left that until last, and to arrange our free organisational meeting with the Bibbleman Track Foundation. We were lucky again. They had an appointment open for us at whatever time suited us, because apparently not many people walk the track at this time of year. Well, that just had to be good news, didn't it? No crowds on the path, no jostling for space in the shelters. Jim, the veteran hiker assigned to guide us through the planning process, was in complete agreement. It's a lovely walk at this time of year, he told us. It makes everything a bit different. It's good to have a challenge. This, coming from a man who'd completed the hike himself more than a dozen times. But never in winter, he explained, so I'll be interested to find out how you get on. His optimism was infectious, so he sort of glossed over what a less positive person might have called the downsides. I think it's a wonderful idea you're doing this all together, said Jim. Yeah, we get along well enough, Gill said. And if not, I just overrule everyone else and we do what I say, I added. No, we don't, said Gill. Not ever. Right, said Jim. Moving on then. Let's talk about food. You'll each be carrying enough for 8 days, because that's the longest time between resupply opportunities. This time of year, there'll be plenty of rainwater in the tanks, so you should be able to fill up your water bottles at each shelter, so long as you don't mind a few wrigglers. Wrigglers? Mosquito larvae. They're in all the tanks, but if it bothers you, you can take a water filter with you to screen them out. Nah, I said, more protein. I could see Gill making a note on the back of her diary. I suspected it read something like, 1, buy a fucking water filter. Which of course we didn't. Jim continued, the best thing you can do is take ready-made dehydrated meals. They sell them in all the camping shops. Yeah, we saw those, but they're a bit out of our budget, I confessed. Yeah, it is expensive stuff. A good alternative is to dehydrate your own food. My wife usually does mine. It takes several weeks to make enough, but there's a machine you can buy to speed up the process. It's an investment, but well worth it. I held my tongue. We'd made a decision before coming in to avoid mentioning that almost all our gear so far had been acquired second-hand from charity shops. This seemed like a suitable moment to unburden myself, but I held firm against the temptation. Your food is the single most important thing to consider, Jim explained. It's vitally important that you eat as balanced a diet as possible. You'll be working your bodies hard, and you have to have the right mix of nutrients to keep going. Yes, I can see what you mean. So, are you going to consider dehydrating your food? No, we've bought about 50 packets of instant noodles. Oh. I thought I'd finally managed to phase him, which is possibly not the best thing to be shooting for in a meeting like this, but it did have a certain appeal. Horrify the experts with our slapdash approach, and do it anyway, thereby proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that we can accomplish anything. Well, so long as we actually accomplished it. Otherwise, we'd look like, well, exactly what we were, a bunch of idiots. So you're going the whole way, and you've got how many days? 2 months, 60 days. That's pretty quick for your first time, but it is possible. You'll have to double hut it a few times. You know, walk 2 sections in one day. That could be 25 to 30 kilometres on those days. Think you'll manage that? I spoke for all of us. We'll try. OK, said Jim. So let's talk about your preparations. Are you doing much walking at the moment? No, not really. Any of you? There was a consensus of shrugs and head shakes as he glanced around the group. OK, well I usually advise people to do a few Ks every day for the first week and see how you feel. Then you can up it to 10 Ks as often as you can over the next couple of weeks, and then start loading up your rucksacks and trying to walk with a little more weight each time. I think he could tell by the slight shifting in our seats that he wasn't really selling us on this idea. OK, so when are you actually setting off? The 3 of us exchanged looks at each other. Tomorrow, Roo said. Ah, but we're quite fit, she continued. And we'll get fitter as we walk, I added. Yes. Jim's reply seemed to have lost some of its conviction. "Don't worry about us," I said to him. "We'll manage." At this point, Jim excused himself for a moment. I like to think he walked out of his office onto some sort of balcony, shook his fist at the sky and called out, "Why, God, why?" More realistically, he was putting in a call to the State Fire and Rescue Service, telling them they'd most likely be needed in the next couple of days, and probably starting a betting pool on how long we'd last on his way back through the office. But the meeting wasn't a total waste of time. For starters, we met Jim, who was a veritable mine of information, all of which will be very useful the next time we decide to walk the track. I'd also like to point out that he was absolutely right in every piece of advice he gave us. In fact, he was a bona fide expert. The fact that we completely ignored it all says more about us than it does about him. Actually, it says everything about us. Criminally unprepared, fiendishly overconfident, and blissfully ignorant of both inadequacies. Story of my life. Anyway, I think it's safe to say that the world of long-distance hiking had a new lowest standard of competitor. Jim also sold us 2 small guidebooks, which he considered essential. We grudgingly forked out $16 for the pair of them, more to make him feel better than for anything else. As far as we knew, this track was signposted. Surely we just had to follow the yellow triangles and we'd get there in the end, right? Wrong. Those 2 books turned out to be every bit as essential as he suggested. They actually saved our lives on several occasions and kept our sanity together throughout the entire trip. The mere thought of doing the track without those guidebooks makes me go cold all over. Almost makes me wonder what difference dehydrated food might have made. Ah well, we'll never know, because it was far too late for that. We'd done our shopping and spent the rest of the evening separating out into our backpacks. We'd bought chocolate, fruit, cornflakes, bread and nuts, tuna and pasta, jam and butter, and noodles. We planned out 3 meals a day for 8 days straight. We matched up our supplies to this before dividing them up to carry and put another 8 days' worth into a pair of plastic crates. These will be delivered to us by a friend of Roo's at the first place the track crossed the road, and hopefully before the stuff we had with us ran out. At last, the packing was done. My rucksack positively bulged. I'd had to strap the tent to the bottom of it. There's no way it would fit inside. I wonder how heavy it is, I mused. I tried to lift it and failed. "It's stuck to the friggin' floor," I moaned. But it wasn't. It was just very, very heavy. "I can almost lift mine," Roo said, helpfully. Gill squatted down and tensed her whole body, as though she was struggling to squeeze out a long overdue turd. Her face went red with the effort, but hugging her rucksack with both knees and both arms, she hefted it a few scant centimetres off the floor. Then she collapsed against it, breathing heavily. "This isn't going to work," I said. "No shit," said Roo. "Either we get dramatically stronger overnight, or we're going to have to do a little repacking." First steps. The following morning, bleary-eyed from lack of sleep, we dropped Rusty off with Roo's family and caught a lift with Sonia up to the start of the track. It was a hot day, and we sweated and swore as we manhandled our ridiculous rucksacks into Sonia's beloved Morris Minor 1000. 3 passengers was quite a squeeze for the antique car, even before considering that our luggage outweighed us, and the windows didn't open. The sun beat down, raising the temperature in the back of the Morris from uncomfortable to molten lava. Sweat dripped off Roo's forehead onto mine, as we were quite oddly positioned, and we sweltered and steamed all the way down the freeway from Perth to Kalamunda, making the trip in exactly the same length of time as it takes to roast 3 large turkeys. Popping like corks from the car, we hauled our rucksacks and dragged them into the shade of a small log pagoda. This was the northern terminus of the Bibbulmun track, which sounded rather grand for a few planks of wood with a map nailed to them. But it kept out the harsh midday sun as we psyched ourselves up for our biggest challenge so far, putting on our backpacks. It took all 3 of us in careful coordination to hoist one bag up and attach it to its target. By the time we'd done this 3 times, we were already knackered. My back was aching, and I was finding it difficult to take a full breath. Gill was panting and staring at the ground, and Roo had propped herself upright against the northern terminus, using it to take some of the load off while she hauled futilely on the various straps and buckles. It was a brave effort, but the reality of the situation was that no amount of rucksack adjustment would stop the things weighing well over 25 kilos apiece. But task 1 was complete. All 3 of us were standing, mostly upright, and almost all under our own power. We'd done it! Surely that meant the hardest part was behind us. All we had to do now was maintain this position whilst walking forward for the next 2 months. Behind our minuscule shelter, the sun still blazed. The first stand of trees, our entry point into the vast jar of forest that would dominate the northern section of the track, shimmered in the heat haze. I remember thinking, what a beautiful day for a walk. And for the next 5 minutes it was. As we hugged Sonia and said our goodbyes, the clouds rolled in. Then, with a flash and a rumble, they split open and pissed all over us. By the time we'd finished filling with our packs, the rain outside the shelter was so intense it was making it hard to see the trees. The sound of it on the tin roof was deafening. Sonia had to shout as she explained she wouldn't be leaving. If we changed our mind about the endeavour, she'd be here to take us back. She had no choice. The sudden downpour was too heavy for the tiny windscreen wipers of her Morris. She couldn't drive home. But we were not deterred. Well, some of us were deterred, but we were dragged along anyway by those of us who were less deterred. Should we wait for it to go off a bit? I suggested. Nah, we're all wearing waterproofs, came the reply. So we marched off into the deluge. Instantly we were soaked. At first we could cope with it. Despite the crippling weight on our backs, we were cautiously optimistic about our chances. After all, how bad can a bit of rain really be? An hour or so later, we'd realised the truth about waterproof gear, which is that the vast majority of it isn't. And the rest of it might as well not be, because when it rains heavily enough, water forces its way into anything. When it meets an impermeable something, it simply finds another route. Waterproof shoes lose their appeal as soon as the rain soaks through to your socks, wicks down to your feet, and turns them into a pair of shoe-shaped swimming pools. Jackets ride up, exposing your soft undergarments, which absorb enough rainwater in a few seconds to make it feel like you've peed your pants. And the bit that stays waterproof, the torso, heavily protected by all that costly Gore-Tex. Well, when you're hiking at speed, through difficult terrain, whilst carrying something the size and weight of a dead rhino on your back, let's just say what the rain doesn't do, sweat does in spades. Only it's smellier. After a few hours, we were all getting a bad case of the "are we nearly there yet?" It was at this point, consulting our miniature guidebook for the first time, we realised that A, our miniature guidebook was ruined, and B, we were nearly there, so long as the halfway point counted as there. We stopped for a soggy sandwich, and what little conversation there was revolved around how to make our gear more waterproof. Personally, I was hoping we'd be talking about going home. I mean, this was ridiculous, right? This rain was too much. It's one thing to nip out to the shops and get a bit wet crossing the car park, but this was something else. We had nowhere to go and nowhere to hide. We were walking through something approaching a biblical flood for no greater purpose than to carry on walking. We were headed to the middle of nowhere with no plan more gratifying than to repeat the process the next day, and no reward stronger than a bowl of instant noodles at the end of it. And yet, with the sandwiches consumed, we struggled back into our bags and carried on. Walking. There seemed to be a lot of walking on this walk. Darkness overtook us as we struggled on towards our destination. Nighttime in the forest comes swiftly and results in much blundering into stupidly positioned trees. We'd hoped and planned to arrive before dark, but we learnt several important lessons that evening. One was that planning, however detailed it may be, is utterly useless if you know nothing about the trip you're planning. Likewise, hope is about as much use as a non-waterproof torch buried at the bottom of a soaking rucksack. Or 3 such torches, in fact. Finally, just as we began to panic, a tiny pinprick of light appeared through the forest ahead. It was in the direction we were heading in, which comforted us. We hadn't been wandering lost for hours, as we'd imagined. It had just taken us a bloody sight longer to reach the campsite than we expected. Gratefully, we waddled towards the light, finding its glare outlined a small, 3-sided wooden hut, not unlike the shelter we set off from. Kind of like a medieval bus stop. A tin roof and walls of rough planks, and a raised platform of the same for us to sleep on. This was our lodgings for the night. And the night after that. And, well, it'd be a while before I'd be seeing a double bed again, that's for sure. We crawled into the shelter, made somehow inviting by the torchlight of a hiker who was already tucked up in her sleeping bag. We shared our wet outer layers, keeping our wet underwear on because we didn't have much choice. All we had to do was find our stove, set it up, find our food, prepare and cook a meal, eat it, dig out all our sleeping bags and mats, arrange them, hang up our wet clothes somewhere, and then we could do the one thing we'd all wanted to do since about 10 minutes into the walk, crawl into bed and go to sleep. But all that had to wait. For now it was freezing cold and we were mostly naked. I squeezed out my undies against myself to wring the worst of the water out of them and fumbled around inside my backpack for my tights. What? Don't judge me. I acquired my gear exclusively from charity shops, remember? There weren't always much choice in the thermal base layer department. Not in the men's section, anyway. So I bought leggings. Beige ones. Size 16 as I recall. They were quite comfy. It took considerably longer to cook the noodles than it did to eat them. I was left thinking that a second portion of about the same size would have been nice, and a steak. But the rest of the noodles would be needed for the rest of the week. As for steak, well, I could always kill and skin a kangaroo, except most of them were substantially bigger than me, and I was armed only with a plastic spork. Steak looked about as likely as duck à l'orange, which is to say, not at all. Partway through our list of chores, we received our final lesson for the night from the solitary hiker sharing our hut. "You should try to arrive before dark," she said. "It's not safe to walk at night." This was followed by an apology, and then her torch was switched off to save batteries, plunging the hut into blackness. To be perfectly honest, I was pretty sick of hiking. Staying on track. We woke to the sound of rain. Heavy rain, pummeling the roof of the shelter, fiddling the view between the gap where the front wall would have been in a house. "Holy shit, that looks miserable," was the first thing I said. "Maybe it'll stop by the time we're ready to leave," Gill suggested. "Surely it can't keep on like this." She was wrong, of course. It rained almost without pause for the next 2 weeks straight. Getting out of bed, when bed had been a sleeping bag on a wooden plank, is probably the second most miserable experience I encountered on the track. Every morning I awoke feeling as stiff as the board I was lying on, muscles screaming from a day of serious abuse followed by a night of extreme discomfort. I felt broken as I struggled to sit and instantly regretted the decision to stand, because this meant getting out of my sleeping bag, and the world outside of my sleeping bag was freezing cold, depressingly grey, and unfairly moist. The first most miserable experience was the one that came next, putting on the cold, sopping wet clothes from the day before. They'd been hung up in the shelter overnight, but had less chance of achieving dryness than an insurance commercial has of making you actually buy insurance. The feeling of soaking, frigid material pulled on over cold, bare skin is something I'll never forget, especially when it reached the more tender parts of my anatomy. There was a chorus of shrieks and wails as we variously dressed ourselves, followed by a frenzy of activity as we all rushed around doing anything we could think of to take our minds off the disgusting, clingy sensation of wet technical wear. Breakfast was next, and was devoured with a desperation that belied its modest components. Cornflakes from a Ziploc bag we each carried, and powdered milk from another. Our rucksacks were festooned with Ziploc bags, and they were one of the only few bits of equipment that actually did what we expected of them. We quickly learned to divide our foodstuffs into 3 plastic shopping bags, each corresponding with 1 meal, so that when we stopped for lunch, but the rain chose to carry on, we could locate everything we needed in one quick move. And then it was time to head off into the deluge. The northernmost section of the Bibbulmun Track takes walkers through towering carrion tingle forests, down mist-shrouded valleys, over giant granite boulders, saith the guide. It sounds so beautiful. I wish I could have seen it. The relentless ferocity of the weather reduced visibility to a tiny patch of saturated foliage about the size of the eye slit I left in my hood. All 3 of us squelched along in disbelief that this much water even existed in the world. For us to get all of it, right through our rain jackets, seemed unfairly generous when so much of the world is in need. Regularly, as I walked, I cursed the woman who told me my boots were waterproof. They'd lasted about 20 minutes. Wet feet, however, were a comparatively minor inconvenience. How does that expression go? Something like, "Does the Pope shit in the woods?" Well, honestly, I don't know. But in case you're ever wondering, a Tony most definitely does. It's not like I had much choice. And for anyone that wants to know, a human poo, passed naturally in the wild, curls around in one long, delicate spiral, looking rather like a walnut whip when it's finished. For anybody who doesn't want to know, you should probably avoid that previous paragraph. Bodily functions were a frustratingly regular occurrence on the track. They took so much time and effort to perform, I'd have gladly gone without were it possible. But no. Inevitably, every couple of hours, one of us would utter the dreaded phrase, "Sorry guys, but..." And so would begin. First we had to stop, and we had to stop someplace suitable, and stop without falling over, which was particularly difficult as we were generally relying on our forward momentum to keep us upright. Next, it required the removal of backpacks. This was a team manoeuvre worthy of recognition by the Arts Council. It evolved daily, and by the end of our first week had been refined into a form so beautifully efficient that it rivalled ballet. Say, for example, Roo had to go. She tried hard not to, bless her, displaying camel-like qualities of water retention, but in the end it was unavoidable. Upon hearing the dreaded words, I would take up position behind her and clamp my arms around her rucksack. Feeling me firmly attached, she would then unfasten her waist belt and shrug her way off the shoulder straps, leaving me supporting the thing. Then she'd spin round and grab a hold herself, and between us we'd lower the bag to the ground. I would be next. Roo would take the weight of my pack momentarily while I slipped out to help her, and then there would be 2 bags on the ground. At this point, if she was desperate, Roo would vanish into the bushes while I relieved Gill of her bag. It was a necessary evil, as standing around fully laden for the time it took one of us to pee simply wasn't an option. By the time Gill had stretched and managed to fill her lungs to capacity once or twice, Roo would be back, and the whole process would begin again, only in reverse. Now, there are exceptions to this process of events. Occasionally, and I stress occasionally, I would feel strong enough to attempt to pee standing up, with my backpack still in place. This was dangerous in the extreme, as falling flat on my face in a puddle of my own piss was not only undignified, it could also be quite damaging, sort of like lying in a puddle of piss while someone drops a piano on you. Washing clothes was not an option, so anything I did choose to lie in was going to be keeping me company for quite some time. But the other deviation from the standard pattern for toilet breaks came not as a result of strength, but of weakness. Because after spending most of the day hiking up mountains with half a sperm whale on your back, your legs tend to get a little trembly. It made crouching somewhere between difficult and impossible. So, more often than not, on the last few toilet stops of the day, I would have to follow Roo into the bushes and hold her up by the shoulders while she peed. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the kind of sacrifice you make for love. I can only thank God that Gill, with her shorter stature and thighs built up by pushing Trevor's wheelbarrows, never required this kind of assistance. The other major reason for stopping was more appealing, and it was a thing we looked forward to all day, every day, and for most of the night as well. It was food. We'd planned out our first 2 weeks of meals very carefully before setting out, but to keep our spirits up and our bodies alive, we'd scheduled an extra stop mid-morning, which came to be known as chocolate o'clock. We'd packed 1 chocolate bar per person per day. No more because we couldn't take the extra weight, and no less because, honestly, if any one of us had to face a day on the track without chocolate, there was a good chance we'd have committed suicide. Lunch was less exciting, but equally vital. And whoever said that hunger is the best seasoning, they were bang on the money. We started out with a loaf of bread swinging comically from each of our rucksacks. The average loaf gives you around 20-odd slices, which meant 3 slices a day for a week. If it was more than a week before we hit the next town, we'd have to resort to crackers. But 3 rounds of bread doesn't make a lot of sandwiches, especially when you're burning around 6,000 calories a day. We tried ways of making them last longer, like breathing between mouthfuls. But the reality of the situation was that by 1 p.m. we were absolutely ravenous. In the end, we developed a desperate way of making it feel like we were eating more. We invented the open-topped sandwich, more commonly known as a single piece of bread with filling on top. This cunning ploy allowed us to feel like we were eating 3 separate sandwiches, each covered with jam or cheese, which made lunchtimes a much more satisfying experience. It didn't actually change what we were eating though, with the result that over the course of the first couple of weeks we all shrank dramatically. Gill got skinny, Roo became skeletal, and I discovered my hip bones and ribs and the knobbly bits of my spine. All of which made sleeping on a plank even more enjoyable. Oh yes, those first 2 weeks, they were a killer. Then one morning I woke up feeling grumpier than usual. I couldn't quite figure out why until, "Happy birthday!" the girls chorused as they sat up. Ah yes, that was it. "You owe me a donut," I growled at them. The girls had outdone themselves though. Somehow, without me noticing, they'd smuggled an extra item with them all the way from Perth. A bag of marshmallows. That evening we clustered around our miniature camping stove, toasting marshmallows on sticks to the amusement of a pair of elderly ladies that were also in the hut. They were doing an overnight hike, and when Gill stuck a match in the top of a marshmallow and gave it to me as a surrogate birthday cake, they came over and offered us something better. Unbelievably, it was a tiny birthday candle. They were travelling with a whole packet of them in lieu of proper candles. This was a kind of revolutionary idea we probably would have learned from Jim if we'd have had time. With the candle lit in the top and the marshmallow made an admirable imitation of a cake. So, as the 2 octogenarian women sang happy birthday to me, I blew it out and made a wish. Actually, I made 2. Please God, I thought, let me be in a better place than this next year. Or tomorrow morning, ideally. And more than anything, tonight, please let me sleep. The marshmallow itself I decided to save for breakfast. I slept remarkably well at night. In the morning, I was still in the same place. But the sun was shining. It was a phenomenon I thought I'd never see again. And deep down, I knew that something else had changed too. It was the marshmallow. I placed it next to my tiny travel pillow as I slept, mere inches from my nostrils, which was the only part of me that dared protrude from the sleeping bag. Now, weak sunlight revealed the damage. My marshmallow was half gone, having been thoroughly enjoyed in the middle of the night by some kind of rodent. I could only be grateful that the tip of my nose had not shared the same fate. I picked it up by the uneaten candle and stared at it in disbelief. "The bastards!" I moaned. "They ate my birthday marshmallow." "Oh, I'm sorry, love," Roo said, patting my arm in sympathy. "Next year we'll try and get you a proper donut." Just let me know if we're going too long.
No, you're going to.
Supply and demand. As we approached the first town we'd seen since leaving Perth, we realised something. It wasn't just the promise of good food and a real bed that was putting an extra spring in our step, nor was it a sudden dramatic increase in strength and fitness, much as we'd wished otherwise. No, what we'd realised is this. Being able to lift our own rucksacks meant that we were dangerously short of food. We were now eating almost double our starting amount at every meal, and were constantly hungry in between times. Everything had gone well with our first resupply. 8 days and 120 kilometres into our journey, we'd reached the first point where the Bibbleman track was accessible by road. We'd eaten every tuna tin and pretzel we brought, and had come dangerously close to eating Gill. But cannibalism had been staved off by the timely arrival of Roo's friend in a car full of food. Now, as we hiked into the small mining town of Collie, a suspicious lightness to our rucksacks told us we'd made it just in time. We trudged wearily down the main street and stopped at the first hotel we came across. This was not a glowing endorsement of our decision-making paradigm. It was the only hotel in town. It was overpriced and it was shabby as hell, and we didn't give a shit. We checked in and were delighted to find that the rooms had heating. In fact, we very nearly collapsed right there and then, but somehow we dragged ourselves back out to complete our chores. "I think we should post the tent home," Roo said. "The shelters have always been empty and we never use it. It must be seriously heavy." "It is," I agreed. "I'm going to get rid of my fire stick too. I'm always far too knackered to practice with it. I can't believe I was dumb enough to bring it, to be honest." We bagged up the items we were each sending back to Perth and bought a giant cardboard box from the post office. Jill unburdened herself of a pair of fire-twirling poi, a bottle of face wash, and the few sticks of makeup she'd permitted herself. "What are you sending home?" I asked Roo. "My so-called waterproof pants," she said vehemently. "I sweat so much wearing them that the inside gets wetter than the outside." "Ha! Great. Score one more for technical gear. Anything else?" "Just these." She pulled out a deck of cards from her bag. And then another one. And then a third. "What the hell are you doing with 3 packs of cards?" "I thought maybe we'd meet a big group of people and they'd all want to play." "But Roo, none of us can even play cards." "I know, that's why I brought these." And she pulled out a deck of Uno cards. "You are fucking kidding me." The pharmacy was our next stop. Both Roo and Gill were suffering terribly with blisters. Blisters on top of blisters, in fact. So many that our limited first aid kit had been struggling to keep up. Bursting them had become our nightly social activity. Next, we headed to the supermarket and spent an hour agonising over all the delicious foodstuffs on offer, not one of which we could take with us. In the end, we bought identical supplies to the first lot we started out with, only substantially more of them. The next hour was spent sitting on the bench outside the supermarket, opening every packet, box and tin, and repacking their contents into more appropriate containers. Tuna we bought for protein and variety. It went into a Ziploc bag inside another Ziploc bag, a lesson we'd learned the hard way when our first meal of tuna erupted all over Jill's backpack. We'd have lost a lot, except we were so damn hungry we'd scooped it out and ate it anyway. Jill's backpack, unfortunately, retained a certain ambience after this incident. Then, when everything that had to be done was done, we could finally relax. Back to the hotel, where we peeled off clothing thick with mud, disturbingly moist and reeking of sweat. We piled them in the furthest corner of the room while we took turns experiencing that ultimate luxury, a long hot shower each, and then we forced ourselves back outside to find some dinner, in our pyjamas. Walking without the bags was a truly strange experience. We felt bouncy, lighter than air, as though we were strolling across the surface of the moon. It still hurt like buggery, of course, because of the torment we'd been subjecting our bodies to for the last few weeks, but it was painful and easy, instead of painful and hard. sometimes you have to be grateful for the small things. And you know what? Right there, next to the takeaway, was a bottle-o. It was as though someone up there was smiling on us, rewarding all our efforts. We nipped in while waiting for our pizzas and bought a cask of goon wine for $10. This was going to be a night to remember. We bounced home in much higher spirits, anticipating the joyous revelry to come. Climbing the stairs to our rooms was a massive effort, but what reward was waiting? Warmth and food and soft blankets. None of which mattered, because I fell asleep on the floor, in my pizza. I never even opened a wine. Sorry. The next morning dawned on 3 equally horrible revelations. The first was quite obviously that we had to leave, to pack our shit and hike out of that haven of comfort and luxury and back onto the sodden forest trails. The second was that because we'd been too tired to do anything about them, our clothes were every bit as soaked and stinking as they had been when we took them off the night before. We had no choice but to put them on and hike off in them. And the third was that there were 4 litres of wine sitting in a box right in front of us that we were going to have to leave it all behind. Unless... And so it was that we hiked out of Collie with our water bottles full of sweet white wine. It wasn't the most sensible choice we made on the track, but it was one of the most entertaining. For the rest of that morning, whenever we paused for breath, we got a little more inebriated. By the time we got to lunch, we were pissed as farts, singing and panting as we staggered along and collapsing at our chosen picnic spot in fits of giggles. For this, I blame the authors of the guidebook. Faced with a rather bland and unending procession of forest, they'd taken to describing many of the plants they considered to be prominent landmarks. To the left, about a kilometre past the wooden bridge, you'll see a dense thicket of Daftus namus extremus, a lovely flowering vine that is common along this section of the track. I don't know. Maybe I'm doing the authors a disservice. Maybe there really are people that counted their steps from the bridge and cast around for a glimpse of this particularly elegant plant that grows everywhere. To us, it seemed like a bloody stupid way to mark the distance, rather like saying the large brown tree, which, as it happened, was there too. But, you know, not for another kilometre. We're in a fucking forest, I howled as Roo read aloud the description. It's full of fucking trees. Look, there's one, and another one. Drink, said Gill. She'd been the first to notice how ridiculously redundant the plant-based reference points were. She'd voiced her opinion that they were blatant fabrications designed to fill space in the book, and we decreed that we turn them into a drinking game. So it was her fault that by the time we finished our sandwiches, we couldn't stand up. And as we were repacking the tubs of jam and peanut butter, I noticed something odd in the top of Roo's bag. Roo, what the hell is that? Duh, it's my fairy tutu. She said it in such a way as to suggest it was perfectly normal to be hiking with a tutu. Which for Roo, I guess it was. It may only have weighed about as much as a Mars bar, but I couldn't let it slide. I mean, hello, there could have been a Mars bar there. I thought you were going to send that home. What? Are you out of your mind? Why on earth would I send this home? I don't know, we were cutting down on weight, so... But it's a tutu, Tony. It's essential. How crazy would it be to hike the entire track and not bring a tutu? Exactly. Listen to yourself. Listen how crazy you sound. But you never wear it. Honestly. Not when it's raining. But if you're going to be like that about it, I'll put it on right now. So she did. And I'll wear it every single day from now until we finish the track. And you know what? She did that too.
Damn right.
Drunk in a forest is a grand place to be, as long as you don't have 25 kilometres to walk before dark and a bag the size of a whale shark on your back. It was a very sorry, if still rather sozzled group that rocked up to the shelter that evening. We were dangerously dehydrated, but at least our raging hangovers helped mask the pain from the rest of our bodies. And, ironically, the night after we'd posted our tent home, we arrived to find the shelter had been completely occupied by a scout troop. Bugger. But to be honest, we were too pissed to care. The scouts thought we were awesome, maybe because we were hiking the entire track, or possibly because we were doing it drunk. So without being asked, all 12 of them squished onto one of the sleeping platforms, leaving the other one free for us. What a lovely bunch of kids. We could have had a great night, Roo said, if only we had a few decks of cards. And that night, despite the lack of soft beds and duvets, we slept like the dead. Oh dear, I'll skip. What time are we at?
You got, it's 2:45.
Oh, I'll skip forward to the end then.
But I did wear my tutu.
She did. We did a fair bit more hiking.
Oh, just a bit.
Point of no return. At long last, we crested a headland and saw the great windmills of Albany's new wind farm gleaming in the distance. As welcome sights go, you could be forgiven for thinking that this was one of the greatest ever seen. But to be honest, we were all having rather mixed feelings. On the one hand, the desperation to be back in town, to eat anything other than bread and instant noodles, to be clean and dry and to sleep on real mattresses was a palpable thing. We talked for days, weeks if I'm honest, about what the first thing we'd do was once we were back in civilization. Take a shit, I think, was highest on my priority list. On the other hand, this was it. The end. Game over. Sighting the graceful white windmills was a bit of a false alarm, in that we still had 3 days to go. From now, they were the size of daisies on the horizon, and would continue to grow until we hiked right beneath the 35-metre-long Kevlar blades mounted on towers twice that height. It meant that the end was a long time coming. We had ample time to address our feelings, triumph mostly at having achieved such an impossible task, gratitude to the gods of fate that somehow allowed us to escape serious injury the entire time, and regret, because no matter how difficult and how painful this journey had been, we still didn't kind of want it to be over. Because what do you do after hiking for over 600 miles? Where do you go? Other than to the pub. Anyone feel like turning back? Roo quipped as we hiked past the signpost. It was a rare distance marker, pointing back in the direction we'd come from. Kalamunda, 952 kilometres, it said. I think that was when it first hit us, that this whole endeavour was nearly over. Remember Cardiac Hill, Gill said. We all had a chuckle. About 3 weeks in, we'd started hearing about this monster from people coming the other way. We'd been psyching ourselves up for it for days. Everyone we met complained that it had nearly finished them off, a slope so long and so steep that it earned its name by giving several people actual heart attacks. Then, one day, we'd started descending and descending, doing a solid 2 hours of serious downhill gradient. It wasn't until right at the bottom that it occurred to me, you know what, folks? I think that was Cardiac Hill. And it was. Lesson learned. Never try to do this hike in the opposite direction. I'll miss climbing mountains, Roo commented. We'd summited several peaks on the course of this hike, our biggest accomplishment being 2 in 1 day. And a beast of a day it was, owing to our decision to double hut it. We'd been unofficially racing a group of loudmouthed army cadets for a couple of days. They'd been doing a week-long section of the track for training and were walking in head-to-toe camouflage, toting all the expensive bits of gear we couldn't afford. There were 3 of them, and they marched off at speed while we sauntered. But somehow we always seemed to catch them up, which became slightly awkward after a while. So we studied our guidebook and planned a coup. Up the highest mountain on the track we climbed, puffing and blowing to find the army boys waiting for us in the shelter at the top. "Thought you lot weren't going to make it," the loudest bloke said. Then he generously offered us one of the 3 rooms in this unique stone shelter, being as how him and his mates had arrived first and occupied the other 2. "No, that's quite all right," I told him. "We're not staying in this shelter. We're hiking on to the next one." And after scoffing a chocolate bar each, that's exactly what we did, leaving him standing there, open-mouthed in disbelief. 34 kilometres we made that day, arriving in the second campsite long after dark. That's 21 miles. It doesn't sound that far, actually, but we did climb 2 mountains, adding almost 1,000 vertical metres up, and the same coming down to our total. "What about you?" Jill asked. "What'll you miss most?" Strange enough, I think I missed the trees. I could feel the black look she fixed on my back. Pah! If I wasn't too knackered to bend over, I would totally find something to throw at you. Roo started the next obvious thread of conversation. "So what won't you miss?" "These bloody boots," I moaned. "Buy a size too big," they said. "But when the wet socks compress to nothing, the shoes expand with wear, and every time I walk up or down a hill, I slide around in them, bashing my heels on my toes with every sodding step. Worst advice ever." "At least you didn't get blisters," Roo countered. "How many do you reckon we've burst, Jill? 3 or 4 a day for the first month?" "I've still got a few," Jill admitted. "You know what I'll miss least of all, though? Having to get up in the middle of the night, in the freezing cold, the dark and the frigging rain, and put on soaking wet shoes to scarper to the loo. And worst of all, no matter how cold I was or how desperate for a pee, I still had to spend ages running the torch around the toilet seat checking for redback spiders." Roo shuddered. "Ugh, yeah, checking under the rim of the toilet seat was the worst. I saw things I can never unsee. I'm mentally scarred. But still, it's better than dying in the wilderness of a spider bite on the arse." Hearing all that surprised me a bit. "So you guys checked the toilet seat for spiders every single time you went? Even at night? Yeah, we had to use a bloody head torch. Why, didn't you? No, never occurred to me. A day later, we passed under the windmills and strolled casually down the side of the main road into Albany. We were stronger, mentally more than anything, having overcome a desire to quit so strong some days it was the only thought in my head. But physically also, particularly the girls. Looking back, I'm blown away by what they achieved. At times I thought the hike would kill me, but both Roo and Gill handled the whole thing, ignoring the pain and carrying on, or on occasion crying with the pain and still carrying on. They'd been directly responsible for me completing the track. I'd never have made it without the example of tenacity and relentless positivity, shaming me into carrying on, even when every fibre of my being screamed at me to give up. Ladies, I salute you. In Albany, we encountered nothing of note. No fanfares, no celebrations, no crowded streets welcoming us back to reality. We were just three tired hikers, hobbling in on battered boots, covering the last few steps of a long and lonely road. So, after we collapsed in the youth hostel and ditched our stinking clothes, we made 2 forays. Once more in our pyjamas. First, we went to McDonald's and ordered everything on the menu, and then found out our stomachs had shrunk so much we could hardly finish a meal between us. Then we went to Kmart and bought 3 plain white t-shirts and a packet of marker pens. I just walked 1,000 kilometres, we scrawled across the t-shirts in a variety of styles. And the next day, when we roused ourselves from 14 hours of blissful sleep, we wore the t-shirts all around town. A few people smiled and waved at us, and then a photographer from the Albany Advertiser spotted us. Our vindication came in the form of an article, printed the very next day, alongside a photo of us looking considerably cleaner than we had in months. "The big trek is done," the headline announced. The article was 1 paragraph long, 108 words, including the title. You know what would make the whole thing more interesting, Roo said. I don't know, if one of us had died. No, next time we should do it for charity. I gave her a long, hard look and tried to inject every ounce of defiance I could muster into my reply. Next time? To this day, I count completing the Bimbledon track as one of the foremost achievements in my life. But it's impossible to tell people about it. Every so often, just for a laugh, I give it a go. I hiked 1,000 kilometres once, I'll chuck casually into a conversation. Whoa, really? Will be the response. Yep. That must have taken ages. It did actually. Took about 2 months. Wow, that's so cool. Hey, did you ever see the movie about that climber that got trapped by his arm? He had to bite his own hand off. And that's about as far as it goes. I could launch into an hour-long tirade about wet feet and crippling shoulder pain, about the dangers of downhill acceleration over rough terrain when you've got 20 kilos on your back, about cold and hunger, gigantic trees and lonely beaches, about mental barriers erected and demolished, and noodles, frigging noodles. But no one really cares. I mean, why should they? No reason to make a big song and dance about it. All I did was go for a walk.
Was a hell of a walk.
And that's it, I guess. So guys, we'll leave it there for this time. Thank you all for suffering through that with me. That was an extremely painful process, but one of the bits that I personally felt was that came out the funniest, just because it's always like adversity that brings out that kind of humour, I guess, just when you look back in hindsight and can't quite believe how bad you actually had it. I'm pretty sure someone said to me when I was volunteering as well that you'll do for free what they couldn't pay you to do. I mean, if somebody had paid us a large sum of money per hour to walk that track, we'd have lasted 10 minutes. We'd have gone, this is bollocks. There is no way we're doing this. But the challenge, and we kept each other going the whole way through. When one of us wanted to quit, the other two would egg them on. And we just, I don't know, we somehow did it.
It's amazing. What an achievement.
Fantastic. And
Can't believe it. Hey?
Roo hasn't shut up ever since about going and doing it again, so
yeah.
Still worried about that.
I keep threatening and saying, "Oh, we should do it again for charity and
we wouldn't
money
do it
for someone."
We wouldn't do it without Gill.
He won't let us.
We couldn't possibly manage it. It was a 3-way effort. Yeah. Firstly, because we had to divide so many tasks and so many other things, and I think either one of us would talk the other into quitting.
And you guys would talk a lot.
Yeah.
Like the whole way.
But I mean, in terms of like just not being able to do it, if Roo wanted to quit badly enough, there's no way I'm going to force her on. Yeah. I might cajole her a little bit and play devil's advocate for all 10 minutes, and then be like, do you know what? You're right. Screw it. Let's go. And she might be a little bit harsher with me, trying to convince me to do it, but in the end, she's always going to give in to me if I really desperately want to leave. Whereas I think having the dynamic, the three of us, because we were in a relationship, Gill and Roo are best mates, and me and Gill obviously brother and sister, and it somehow
worked.
Two people would gang up on whoever's really wanted to quit, and I could badger Roo, but not so much Gill, because Gill wouldn't take any shit from me, and it was the same way. Sort of Gill and Roo both felt that they could badger me, but they couldn't really badger each other as much because although they were best mates, it was so it was like, and that dynamic really kept us going. Fair play to people who just hike it and just do it and achieve it, and there's a lot of them out there who can just. But then again, a lot of them probably have the right gear and lighter bags, dehydrated meals, so that they're strong and
Torches that work.
Torches that work. Shoes that didn't give them blisters the entire way.
Oh, everyone has blisters.
Right, so we're done on this one, guys. Thank you very much. Next Sunday, we've got one more. I think we're getting towards the end. You see my bookmark there. So next time we'll do a little bit about my mother, bless her heart, who came to visit us, and then about New Zealand, because we went there as well, in fact. And this is actually, this book, about just over 3/4, maybe 4/5 of it, is based on the 2 years we spent in Australia. And then we actually spent 2 years in New Zealand as well, and that only gets like the last that much. What can I say? It was a damn long book. So anyway, next week we will have New Zealand and a little bit of Mum.
A little bit of Mum. You'll love it.
To that.
Sorry,
bless her, Mum's watching. So guess what, Mum? The story about you getting stuck by your arse in the cave deep underground. That's happening next week. So watch this space, guys. Thanks very much for tuning in.
Everyone.
Really appreciate it.
Stay
and
safe and healthy.
have a safe, happy week, and look after
And
yourselves.
don't hike 1,000 kilometres unprepared.
Yeah, don't ever do that.